Egyptians are voting for a second and final day today on a new constitution. Egypt's military is behind this referendum, hoping it will pave the way for the nation's top general to be elected president. But critics say it's just a veiled attempt to legitimize the military government that unseated former President Mohamed Morsi and could end up creating even more problems and lead to more violence between military loyalists and Egyptians that are still holding on to the ideals of the Arab Spring. Those ideals, of course, also include democracy. This is all happening as Congress appears poised to pass a spending bill that will give $1.5 billion to Egypt. Michelle Dunn is a senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a co-chair of the Working Group on Egypt, a bipartisan group that's working on policy related to Egypt. Michelle, it's nice to see you.
Thank you, Jenna.
In relation to the potential aid that could be going to Egypt, you've been quoted this week as saying you feel there's a sense of our administration and, quite frankly, of other lawmakers sort of giving up on Egypt. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that this new bill gives the administration a great deal of freedom to restore all the aid to Egypt, some of which had been suspended after the military coup this summer. If Egypt just carries out the minimum steps it's going to do, the constitutional referendum that's happening right now, presidential and parliamentary elections, the legislation doesn't even require that the elections are free and fair or that there's a real restoration of democracy. These changes in countries like Egypt and other places are going to be long and hard. And the United States is really having a hard time developing a sustainable policy. How do we encourage, the emergence of democracy and economic prosperity over the long run? It seems like we're giving up already.
One of the issues that had come up over the last several years is, of course, Egypt elected, controversial as it was, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohamed Morsi. And that raised a lot of issues here inside the United States, questions about his power and questions about whether or not we're loyal to promoting democracy in places like Egypt or loyal to promoting administrations in other countries that are loyal to us. How do you think the balance should be when democracy can elect people that perhaps we would not agree with?
Well, Morsi was a very ineffective president. He became very unpopular, and indeed, the Muslim Brotherhood, while they were in power, did a number of undemocratic things and tried to concentrate too much power in their own hands. What they should have been allowed to do was to fail through elections that were coming up. There were parliamentary elections that were going to happen this fall. Instead, the military used this wave of popular discontent to step in and to now completely try to crush the Muslim Brotherhood, to call them a terrorist movement, and to carry out a very large campaign, not only against them, this campaign now has expanded to the young revolutionaries who led the 2011. We're really seeing a restoration of military rule here.
And of course, it's not just about this aid that we could potentially be giving this year, but we have invested billions and billions of dollars in Egypt over the last several decades. If the military does take control in an election, what do you think we'd be investing in? What type of government?
Look, Egypt, what we want from Egypt is for it to be a reliable security ally for the United States and a good peace partner for Israel. Egypt can only be those things if it's reasonably stable. And it's only going to be reasonably stable if the government is able to meet the needs of the people. And that means economic prosperity. It means a reasonable level of respect for human rights and political freedom. Unfortunately, the military government that's in power now, and indeed if the defense minister becomes president or controls things with someone else out front as president, he's taking Egypt down a road toward persistent instability. So that's going to mean that Egypt is not going to be able to be the partner we want it to be. And the United States should not be using its aid to encourage an ally that's going down a path of instability.
Michelle, if I could just broaden it out as a final question, we were talking a lot about Benghazi today. Libya, of course, is a neighboring country to Egypt, and there's been a lot of questions about Libya and the way forward there. But here's a quick map of the area. Obviously, we've talked a lot about our intervention in Syria, our intervention in Iraq as well. How do you think our actions, or lack thereof, as some have said, in Egypt set a precedent for how we're approaching other countries in the region overall?
Well, what has happened in Egypt has already had its effect in other countries. You know, people see that there was a democratically elected government, however unpopular in Egypt, that it was overthrown, and that the United States really didn't do anything much about that. Unfortunately, it's feeding into this narrative that the United States doesn't support democracy. It only cares about its narrow interests, and that's not in our interests. You know, as I said, democracy will take a long time to emerge in this region. We need to find a way to support that in a sustainable way while we continue to work with governments on counterterrorism and the security of Israel and other critical interests.
Michelle, great to have your thoughts on the program today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna.